So I'm going to go over two images today. I'm going to go over Orash's morning interior, and I'm going to do Mario's kind of science experiment area based off of this reference. So let's start with Orash, and let me know if I'm mispronouncing your name, and I will help correct that. So in here, this is a great start. We don't have any reference. We don't have, but we do have a very great base to start with, and I think it really shows the morning aspect of this room. Just a little bit of atmosphere pointing to the direction of the desk and the wall and the books. So this is really accomplishing much of the work. I think there's a couple things that you can do to help push this a little bit further. The first one is I think you can grad down as we get closer to the foreground. So this can come down a bit, and you can take this area down a bit, just kind of almost vignetting this a little bit more, but it's more of the ground, like this ground section, the wall section kind of just darkening a bit, and you can start darkening the door up here as well, and like the door frame. You can see that these are big flat white areas, and whenever we're like working within an image, gradients help us focus a little bit more and helps shape the scene. So let's take this down a little bit. Let's take this down so that the floor and the walls and the doors aren't as flat, and helps us kind of move into space. The next thing you can do is just take maybe this paper down just a little bit. Right now it feels a little bit flashed, or even if you want, you can desaturate it a bit, just to get a little bit of separation from the table. The table and the paper right now feel like they're the same value, the same color, so it's not separating as much. If we want to focus on this paper, maybe desaturating it a little bit will help separate it. The next thing is, let's add some bounce within the scene. So again, it's going to help create shaping within our shot and feel like that morning sun is coming. So like with this section, wherever the hot spots are happening, you can add some bounce this way. You can add some bounce up over here in this direction. You can add bounce up here. Very soft. You don't want it to feel directional, but just almost indirect. Like what we're getting, what's great is if you look at this like windowsill, you have this great bounce and shaping going up. I think we just want to add a little bit more of that elsewhere, so you can feel some of that like grad happening within the scene. Next, I think you can overexpose this window a little bit more. You have it starting over here, but let's overexpose these sections too. Usually outside, you can see like I wouldn't expect this to be as dark. I feel like some of the trees would kind of go in this. This is a great example of overexposure. This feels overexposed. So I think you can take these trees back here and go in this value range and make it feel much brighter, and that'll help actually separate this window a little bit more too. As I'm looking at it, it feels, we have like dark almost over dark, but we want to have a little bit of separation at dark over light. Still have some of those interesting shapes back there, but I think overexposed will help, and then it also help influence this specular hit too. This is like bonus points, but I think you should probably try to add some images in here. It doesn't have to be anything distracting, but just to give it a little bit of personality and to help tie it into this environment. The next thing that you can do is take down all these kind of distracting specular hits. If you look at the image, my eye keeps going to all these like high contrast areas. So we have all these specular hits happening. You can still you can have this like this value right here. You still see the plane change. It goes top plane and then the dark planes here. But here, my eye tends to get distracted. So I think you just take these down just enough so that you feel the plane changes, but your eye isn't getting distracted. So you're gonna want to hit these points, these spec hits, all these right here, down to here, all these specular hits, all the areas that are of high contrast in the foreground. Let's keep our high contrast going to the areas that we want to look at, and then take away some of those high contrast areas of stuff that we just want to feel but not look at. Next thing is, let's lift the fills on the lamp a little bit. Right now, let's squint our eyes, and the lamp, other than the key hits and the bounce hits, it's starting to blend with the background a bit. So maybe you might need to increase the fill. Maybe you need to have another shape or area light or something larger, plain light to help fill this. But let's try to separate this from the background, because we want to have our desk, and we want to have the desk separate and simplify against this background. A really good example is some of this stuff up here. You get this simplified shape against a dark background, but it's not overwhelming. We want to do the same thing here. Last thing is, let's add some halation to all of the things that are overexposed. So you can see a little bit of it right here. If we dive in, we can get a little bit of halation happening here. But I think like where we have these overexposed areas, when I'm talking about halation, let me pull up an example that I have. Like when we have something that's really overexposed and hot, it tends to create these glows that get really saturated based off of the color of the light source. So we have these overexposed specular hits and diffuse hits and just sources outside. We want to add a little bit of that glow happening. You don't need to go too much. This feels about right. So you can add a little bit of glow or halation to everything that is like supposed to be in key, overexposed, really bright. So that'll add that sense of optical effects that happens in your camera. And then the last things that you'll want to do is add some DOF. Let's take a little bit more shallow DOF. Like right now, everything is in focus. And let's start to take this foreground out of focus. Let's defocus the exterior as well. I think that'll also help, because I believe when I'm looking at this, the image in the background is a bit lower, but if you start to blur it, you'll get rid of some of those artifacts. So I think it's a great start. It feels very bright and like the morning. And I think the last thing, I do see them. The last thing you can do is probably just brine a little bit of these of dust in the air. It only in like the really like where the light is coming from and in your God rays. But let's just bring those up just a little bit more so we can feel them. Not too much, just enough so they separate from the background. All right, great job. Next, I'm gonna go to Mario, and we're gonna go off of this this image and this reference. So first of all, great progress. I think this is a really challenging shot, and this is something that we come across in production a lot. We have an environment that just has a lot of interesting objects, and we have a lot of contrast of hues and different contrast against really dark elements against bright elements. So it starts to become really hard to focus. And where do we take our eye? And I know you said that you want to focus on these two characters. And right now we just have so many interesting things that our eye is wanting to look at. We have this really saturated blue elements here that have high contrast. We have all these other elements that just are really just super interesting to look at. So I think what we want to do, and I'm gonna go through this in a second. We want to do is actually simplify this image to be able to focus on the characters that we want, or the objects we want to, similar to what we have in our reference. So this reference does a great job of simplifying. You can see the background, like we're pushing the background, thinking about what do we want in the foreground. The foreground has much more contrast, whether in saturation, and then our background we want to kind of push a little bit further with less contrast and a little bit darker. You can see in the reference that we have these lighter elements that all these bottles, and you can see the layering too. It's just this layer right here. All of this has higher contrast, and over something that's a little bit darker, there's still a lot of elements. You can see there's a ton of bottles back here. There's a lot of like interesting wallpaper or the bats in the back, but they group together, and that's what we're gonna try to do. Is we're gonna try to group a lot of this stuff together in the background, and then group a lot of this stuff in the foreground together to allow us to focus a lot more on our character here. And then the other thing, big thing, is we're gonna try to move our key light a little bit higher, so that way we can just really, right now, if we're looking at it, it's actually pointing more towards, my eye starts going here first because it's really pointing towards this mannequin, and we really want it to start pointing more to here. You can see it still is, but it's the directionality of it actually is better if we just cut off this mannequin and then really focus it down to here. So I'm going to go through all the steps that I was trying to take and go over why I was taking it to try to get us to focus down here. So the first thing, as you saw, is, let me just take all of these down, kind of go back to where we were in the beginning. And the first thing I started thinking about, okay, let's think about our key light. And I want to take my key light and I want to move it up. See how I'm thinking about, I want the light to come from above here, similar to what they're doing in our reference. It actually works really, really well to have that light a little bit higher and focus in this general area. So with that, what I did first was, like, I just took down the saturation, and I took pretty much everything just a little bit darker. So you can see, like, the saturation is down. I still kept most of the saturation really, like, on this character. That's who we want to focus on. So when you're looking at saturation, let's focus on here. And then the other thing, let's start to shape these characters a bit. Right now, if we look at this, the characters are getting really flat. and we have, you know, if you look at the hand, if you look at the face, everything starts to get flat. So I think you need to, you know, shape the characters where you potentially similar to this, you might need to hit it with the rim key on the side, and then have more of a wrap around it, so just to get a little bit of shaping on these characters. So the first thing, darken, deset, and then start to shape our characters a bit. The next thing I did, I just darkened this. I darkened these areas to show where the light should be coming from. I hit the character with a little bit more rim, and you can also see too, like as I'm darkening, I'm also brightening some of these planes on these objects just to separate it from the background a little bit. So brightening a little bit inside of these glass objects. You can see like a lot of these glass objects don't really have black contrast in them. So yeah, you'll see in a little bit, but I'm gonna try to get rid of some of that a bit, so just to help separate. So taking things dark, adding some of these shaping to the characters, focusing the key light in a certain area, and then let's see, yeah, and so I brightened up this area up here, similar to what our reference is, just trying to make that feel like the light is coming from the outside here. And the next thing I did is I actually took the color of this area and went from blue to more cyan, closer to like this color here. And another reason why to do that is it starts to group with the background a bit. So we have a very green type of wall here, and the greens here, although this is a little bit cooler, now it starts grouping a little bit more. Additionally, it helps with the hue contrast. These are complementary colors, so cyan and red become much more complementary, and it allows us to focus again on this character. Additionally, if you look in your foreground, more greens, so we're now creating some harmony of colors. So before you had blue, and blue against everything else becomes this really interesting color to look at. So like my eye starts going over here because it's different than everything else in here. But if we go more towards the greens, now it starts grouping with the environment a little bit more. It's still interesting that of light that we have, but it's not as distracting, and it helps simplify the scene. The next thing that I do is I now start adding less contrast in the background. So and now you can start seeing that things in the foreground are starting to separate. Our character who has more contrast, these objects that have more contrast in them actually start to separate, and it simplifies the background. You can see that it's starting to simplify everything. It's grouping all of this together, so that way things of more contrast start to come out. Everything that has less contrast gets pushed back a bit. And then the next thing I do is I'm trying to fill these center sections out a bit, and you'll see that I'm doing that because I'm going to be darkening the background even more. So if I didn't brighten in the inside, it wouldn't separate. So we want to light over dark. So I'm darkening the background more, similar to what our reference is doing, darkening, so we have less contrast, but it's darker. And now we have higher contrast and lighter in the foreground. So again, now we're starting to separate, and we can start focusing. So we have darker elements around the edge. We have this light kind of shining on our character here. And it helps us focus a little bit more. And the last thing that I did is I just started adding more highlights to some of these objects. Again, we want to emphasize that this light is coming from the right side, so adding those highlights back in really helps. So you don't want to have a dark, you want to have light over dark, you want to have more contrast in the foreground, less contrast in the background. We want to shift our light to this way. We want to desat the colors a bit. The desaturation actually makes this feel a little more cinematic as well. And then we're going to want to shift some of these colors, such as this light, to a little bit more green to help feel analogous in our color scheme. So we have warmer greens in the foreground, we have cooler greens in the background, again helping with our separation between foreground and background, helps with the plane changes. The other thing you might not have noticed was when I hit with this more light, you'll see like I'm hitting the edges, rimming this character a bit, and also hitting light on the top planes of the table. So that way we're creating what's known as a plane change. We have our front plane and we have our top plane. So we have a lighter plane up above, darker plane in the front. So we're always looking at how can we shape. It's a puzzle piece. How do we shape? How do we separate? What things do we need to simplify? What things do we need to have a little bit more complex, and get our eye to focus on that? So those are some steps you can take to help focus our eye, get it a little bit closer to what this reference is, and simplify the image, going from this to this. All right, so great start. Keep going. If you have any questions, let me know, and happy lighting.